everyone, and welcome back to the trilogy on the void of insanity that is to train up a child. This video is the second installment to my 50 subscriber special, and there's a hell of a lot to cover this time. If you have not watched my first video on this crash site of terrible literature yet, I highly suggest that you do so, because I can guarantee none of this will make any sense unless you start this ride from point A. I will not be giving the content warnings I gave in the beginning of last episode. You have already been warned. However, I do have points you can skip to in the description below, as well as the comment section for those of you watching on mobile, because what you are about to hear is explicit. I myself had a hard time writing the script for this video at some point, so I think it's necessary. This book's first 7 chapters started out as downright comical, due in part to how idiotic and tasteless it was, but now we're getting into the darker and more twisted stuff. I will stop teasing you now and show you what I'm talking about. Chapter 8 has many problems. They start out the chapter by saying that children are not under any authority unless you abuse them. They even go so far as to call children being what they naturally are the sin of witchcraft. What baffles me the most about Chapter 8 is that these lunatics actually admit to using these methods on children that aren't even theirs. Yes, I'm serious. And the sad part is, this isn't the only instance they actually admit to doing these things throughout the entire book either. They even admit to manipulating the parents of some of these kids into using these methods as well, so it doesn't matter whether or not the parent is in the room when they abuse them. So even so much as bringing children to their household in general puts them at risk. This raises several questions, the biggest ones I have being simply these. Who in their right mind would let these psychopaths babysit their children, and how are these people not in prison? These people are also the type to make the older kids do the grunt work of raising the younger ones to make it easier on themselves. Nobody I've talked to whose parents made them do this ever appreciated it. They always said they felt as if they were robbed of a childhood in a sense. So their household environment is definitely not a healthy one. Especially when you consider that they even say that parents should beat their kids for seeking attention from the other parent after they were beaten by the one, even if the other thinks it's wrong. The parent in doubt should never confront the other about being abusive in front of the kids, let alone at all for that matter. They should just subject the child to the same abuse they just suffered. They should never try to defend their kids from an abusive parent or relative. They should just allow it to happen because Bible. It only gets worse as we go on. If anyone is curious as to what my least favorite chapter of this book is, it would be this one. There are so many things wrong with Chapter 9 that it deserves a video all on its own. Not only do they confess to abusing other people's kids not once, but twice in this chapter, you can really catch a glimpse of exactly how warped the Pearl's perception of reality is. To start off, they say that the only dolls a child should ever be allowed to play with are baby dolls, and Barbie dolls teach kids how to be a sex goddess. Now there's the insanity of religious extremism we were expecting all along. They give a personal story about a 3-year-old they saw playing with a rag doll and practicing the methods her parents were using on her onto her doll. They actually call her a, quote, 3-year-old mother already prepared to rear happy and obedient children, unquote. Debbie did not write this part, and it's every bit as creepy and depraved as it sounds. They also tell the reader that the easiest way to calm a finicky baby for a nap is to, you guessed it, beat the crap out of them with a stick until they stop resisting. Another thing they try to do is tell us what the proper response to a kid making a mess is. It, according to them, is to make the kid clean it up, and if they resist, beat the hell out of them. They are disgustingly descriptive, and reading this part actually made me queasy, so I don't recommend reading this if this is a thing that would be bothersome to you. They then do some intense power leveling and reveal information about themselves that the reader could have gone the rest of their lives without knowing. All this information does is reveal that the Pearls have no other skills outside of child abuse, breeding, manipulation, and terrible writing. I will not give them the satisfaction of repeating what they revealed. Take a peek at the web archive of this book in the description below if you really want to know. This is the short version of Chapter 9, so we'll move on. Chapter 10 is ironically named Safety Training, but all it does is put kids in danger. They repeat Chapter 1's method with an empty shotgun. They then suggest burning a child on a hot stove with it being just hot enough not to inflict a blister. They try and play it off like they let the kids do it themselves, but we all know bullshit when we read it. They then talk about teaching toddlers how to swim by pushing them into a pond. They then try and say, don't try this unless you can maintain control over all the circumstances. It sounds more like they gave up and lost control of their own actions. Another example of Pearl-style child endangerment is yelling at the child to get out of a truck fast, so they jump headfirst out of a window onto the road. So instead of an explosion in the back seat killing them, they'll be killed by oncoming traffic or a drunk driver because they jumped out of a moving vehicle onto the fucking road. The best part, they actually say none of this is to be done with excessiveness or fear. They encourage you to expose your children to life-threatening situations to teach them about safety. Mike then shows his blatant narcissism by then calling himself the General, and brags about how he abused his kids into being mindless and obedient slaves to his whims. It's an eye-roll-worthy portion of the book and serves no purpose outside of inflating his already swollen ego. That's about all there is to Chapter 10, and Chapter 11 is no better. This chapter suggests potty training a small child by hosing them off in the yard. They then try and say not to apply emotional pressure while doing this, even going so far as to tell the reader not to embarrass their child or cause them to feel blame. Yet they talk about how the parents of this child in one personal story told him how he was too young for things he enjoyed just because he wasn't doing what they wanted him to do. They resort to humiliating this 3-year-old kid instead of actually taking the time with him. Contradiction much? This is another short chapter with little substance. However, unlike Chapter 7's Bible thumping, it's just droning personal stories that show just how off their thread they are. They waste 2 entire portions of this chapter on the same personal story, so it sounds like they ran out of ideas once again. They say if bedwetting has an emotional cause, it's always the parent's fault because it can't be a mental condition or some other disability, God forbid. It has a little more substance than Chapter 7, but it's still almost as short, and I think I've given it enough attention. With a chapter titled Child Labor, you know it's going to go exactly how you think it will. They say a house full of 7-year-olds ought to be self-sustaining. I could understand teenagers and preteens, but 7-year-olds? I understand teaching kids responsibility and how to care for themselves, but this is unhealthy. They say parents should teach their kids how to do gender-appropriate activities, and say that the mother is molding a future wife and mother, as if the daughter shouldn't have any other aspirations outside of being exactly that. This is just Mike trying to mansplain what vaginas are supposed to be for, and trying to make it sound like he's not. I probably sound like a rad femme right now, but this is stuff they actually wrote, and stuff where feminism and equality actually applies. Their excessive use of gender roles shows here and brings light to exactly how primitive and backwards they really are. Shit like this is why feminism exists and even matters in the first place. They even say boys growing up around a flock of girls as children lack masculinity. People like the Pearls are every reason Christianity looks bad to outsiders and why it is laughed at in mainstream society. To all the Christians in the audience, you guys should be way more offended at this book than I am. The Pearls are using your faith to justify child abuse, toxicity, and manipulation, and are selling this garbage back to you. Religion is not an excuse for any of this, and their lack of regard for the law and morals put in place for a reason is made blatantly obvious. Debbie is responsible for a long and droning paragraph in this chapter talking about their Amish neighbors, and it really is a pointless thing to even write because nobody cares about their neighbors. This book is about the Pearls' methods and their faith. Way to make 2 societies look bad in the same pitiful excuse of literature, guys. Probably explains the source of these so-called methods, but it's not an excuse, especially when you consider that these are the same methods the Amish use to train stubborn livestock. Talking about your neighbors and keeping that detail in mind is not by any means a selling point. This chapter says to judge kids by their intentions, but every chapter before this one contradicts that argument completely. Pretty much any normal parenting advice they give that is actually useful is ruined somehow by their foul and toxic natures. They ruin the advice given here by saying that normal teenage angst is an added burden, and that it's harder to manipulate and abuse a child the older they get if you don't start doing it the second they're born. No shit, Sherlock. Kids, especially older ones who know this crap isn't normal, will not treat it like it's normal. Of course they're gonna call you out. Of course they're gonna want someone to help them stop this. Of course they're gonna seek help outside of the family. You wouldn't want them to know anything else outside of the lies and manipulation you've brought them up with, because then you can't fool them anymore. They say any punishments should never come from a place of anger, but these people seem to be pissed off all the time. Their writing doesn't fool anyone. They're miserable people teaching others how to make their kids as miserable as they are. Only one chapter left to cover here, and it's just as foul as the rest. These creeps try and make it seem like all kids can control their parents through emotional manipulation, because being in extreme physical pain minus broken bones means they aren't suffering, they're just mad or angry. Again, I'm no expert, but I certainly don't think that kids are that aware, and if they seem like they are, there are definitely some psychological and possibly environmental issues there that need to be looked at pronto. This entire chapter is essentially some more projection on the part of the authors, as well as more personal stories and outrageous ideals that show off their combined shattered psyches for what they really are. Mike actually writes here that he was determined from a young age that he'd rear no sissies, but everything he's wrote in this tome of abuse so far reads like a post out of R9K. If anything hurts a narcissist's ego, they come crumbling down worse than a Nature Valley granola bar. The Pearls are no exception. They just think being self-righteous and preachy makes a difference and are just so proud to admit it. They admit to not taking care of skinned knees and the like in this chapter because obviously wounds never get infected, and first aid kits that exist for a reason are for pussies. They try and cushion this by saying that when medical attention was needed, it was administered calmly because they forgot Chapter 10 exists. They also essentially call people who self-harm crybabies and say that your daughter's future husband will appreciate you beating the crap out of her so he doesn't have to, and that your sons will be better men. They call this shit training, but they're just trying to populate the world with spouse and child abusers. This portion of Chapter 14, along with the rest of the book, leads me to believe that Mike and Debbie are such insufferable individuals that they are the only two people on Earth who can actually tolerate each other. I don't think there is any other explanation outside of that as to why these people are actually married with kids. It sure explains a lot. They finish this chapter off by saying that if a baby cries, meet its needs and make whining an unrewarding experience. I would be genuinely shocked if these people can actually tell the difference between the two scenarios, because this book is solid evidence that they can't. Speaking of evidence, I've counted at least 9 legit confessions of child abuse throughout the book thus far, just saying. I knew this book was going to be beyond hot garbage going in after watching Rachael's 2 videos on it, but it was still a marvel to me nonetheless as to exactly how fucked in the head religious extremists like the Pearls can actually be. The fact that they're proud of this and continue to advocate any of it fascinates me. Even after their book has been associated with 3 known deaths, they still continue to preach this crap. According to the article on Babbel, Mike addressed the case of Hannah Williams on the No Greater Joy website when it happened, and this is what he had to say for himself. Quote, Hannah Williams' parents were given the maximum prison sentences. Articles are appearing in blogs and newspapers across the country that are full of fabrications, lies, and misstatements about to train up a child. It should not be taken as fact because it is written somewhere. What the Williamses did is diametrically opposed to the philosophy of No Greater Joy Ministries and the content of the book. The motivation of No Greater Joy is to provide materials that help parents raise healthy and happy children. The methods outlined in the book have been endorsed by psychologists, psychiatrists, and child behavior therapists and are widely used to change inappropriate behavior. It is alleged that Hannah's parents owned a copy of the book. They either did not read it or totally ignored the content. The book repeatedly warns parents against abuse and emphasizes the parents' responsibility to love and properly care for their children. There are hundreds of thousands of parents who have and are properly applying the philosophy of the book with the joyous results of happy, productive, and well-adjusted children. The proper application of the book could have corrected their poor parenting and prevented the abuse and death of Hannah Williams." Unquote. If any person who deals in mental health, such as a psychologist, psychiatrist, or what have you, is actively endorsing stuff like this, they shouldn't be working in the profession. This book has influenced 3 deaths and thousands, possibly even millions of more cases of PTSD and other problems associated with child abuse, endangerment, and neglect that weren't and aren't being covered by news outlets. The only evidence of this are the victims themselves who are speaking up, be it online or anywhere their voices can be heard and taken seriously. The Pearls need to follow their own advice and not take written statements as fact, because that's exactly what they're doing with their evangelical Christian faith. For those of you wondering, the reason I say this is that many sources I've read talking about this book specifically either call the Pearls Christians, evangelists, or both of those things. Whether or not they can be considered fundamentalists, I am not entirely sure. So anyone who knows more about this, who can clear this up in the comments section, would be greatly appreciated. I don't know much about Christianity, but everyone who identifies as Christian that I have told about this book's contents have indeed said that all of it goes against the faith. So take that as you will. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you like what you saw and wish to see more like it. If you didn't like this video, I can't say I blame you. Feel free to file a complaint on my Discord server as well as my other social media outlets, all of which are linked down below. And I'll see you guys in the next installment. Stay safe and take care.